Being a Helldiver, it's hard not to get up close and personal with the many enemies of democracy. Fortunately, the Federation has gone out of its way to provide us with some useful melee weapons to slash, stun, and prod our foes with righteous impunity. But with 7 melee weapons currently in circulation, what are the pros and cons of each, and which faction should you use them against? Well, strap on in, because in today's briefing, we'll zoom in on each of these weapons and give you some advice on how and when to use them, if at all. Let's go.
Helldivers to Hellpods. Repeat, Helldivers to Hellpods.
In keeping with our love for order and harmony, we'll go through each melee weapon according to its alphanumeric designation. And what better instrument of liberation to start with than the CQC-1 One True Flag, which can be purchased via the Masters of Ceremony Premium Warbond. Occupying a support weapon slot, the One True Flag, bearing the proud insignia of Super Earth, is more than a mere pointed stick. In truth, it's a long spear of freedom that can pierce the tyrannical hearts of foes from a decent distance.
It's gotta be the most democratic melee weapon of all. But how does it measure up when used on the enemies of the Federation?
Good question, Interloper. Against the bugs, it's surprisingly effective. As long as enemies aren't heavily armored, of course. Even in larger swarms, you can hold off these fungal specimens with a few enthusiastic pokes. That said, you don't want to use it against the bellies of bile or nursing spewers, since without the right armor, you'll end up in pieces. It's also not a good idea to use against bile spitters. In fact, we wouldn't recommend using melee weapons against any smaller bile types unless you have no choice. As for the bots, it's hilarious prodding a Scout Strider or Devastator to death. But against groups of troopers, you're basically dead in the water. If you can sneak up on medium units, it's great for fast, silent takedowns. But beyond this, you may want to switch to your primary, since ranged combat is what the clankers specialize in. And finally, against the Illuminate, it's very decent for safely dealing with sizable groups of voteless. But once the crowd gets too big, it's time to fall back. When it comes to taking down their ship's shields and dealing with overseers, not the flying kind because range, it's way better. Forget flesh mobs and anything bigger though, unless you're feeling really crazy and democratic. Overall, the CQC-1 One True Flag is an excellent melee weapon for medium enemies and decent at crowd control with bugs and squids. And hey, if all else fails, you can plant the flag and salute democratically as you meet your maker, Helldivers. Next up is the CQC-2 Saber, which is also unlocked via the Masters of Ceremony Premium Warbond. This elegant ceremonial sword has a fast attack speed and is best suited for dealing with crowds of lighter enemies. We, of course, wore the appropriate armor from Masters of Ceremony while wielding both this and the One True Flag. Because we love freedom, justice, and democracy just as much as you do.
Ah, my super grandpa had a saber just like this. Just like the Constitution, it's a beautiful piece of Super Earth tradition.
That it certainly is. Now, the saber can be accessed via your armory and, like most melee weapons, takes up your secondary slot. It's much shorter than the One True Flag, but what it lacks in penetration and reach, it makes up for with pure style and speed. Going up against the bugs with the saber, especially the Predator strain, is risky business. Unless you're carrying a ballistic shield, you're basically a sitting super duck. While it's good for dispatching scavengers and decent with hunters and warriors, you will not win a sword fight with a stalker. Trust me. Side note, maybe we need a parry option. Overall, not recommended against bugs unless you have a very specific build and pair it with some ranged weapons. As for bots, it's a lot more fun. Against rocket troopers and standard troopers, it's a solid weapon. Even taking on devastators, if you're careful enough, is very satisfying. That said, large crowds are a no-go, and forget about taking on raiders, jet brigade troopers, and pyro troopers. Even if you kill them, they explode and, well, if you're too close, you get the idea. Then with the squids, the saber does a fine job removing the legs of voteless and keeping them at bay. But against overseers, you'd be better off with the One True Flag. While it is possible to fight and take down overseers with the saber, their strong melee attacks make engaging them extremely risky. Beyond this, the saber is basically useless against flesh mobs and heavier squid units. In conclusion, the saber makes for decent crowd control, mostly on Illuminate, but without heavy armor and a ballistic shield, Going for medium enemies is, especially in numbers, a death sentence. If you prefer to bring out your inner Viking or Prospector, the CQC-5 Combat Hatchet, which can be acquired via the Superstore for 200 super credits, is probably the melee weapon you're looking for. Like the Saber, it's short range and has light armor penetration and 110 melee damage. In this respect, it's almost identical to the Saber, but there are some key differences. With the bugs, it's arguably better than the Saber, and medium enemies in particular. I was able to put down an unsuspecting Brood Commander, as well as some Half Guards and a Bile Spewer, with relative ease. It seems to stagger enemies and knock them back, which gives you a window to attack once again. I felt like I fared better against swarms of lighter enemies too, but would need to test further to really confirm this.
I guess it's tough to really know the ins and outs without rigorous testing, but that makes sense to me, Vanguard.
That's not all though. With the bots, I achieved similar results. Pretty decent performance against Devastators and Scout Striders, but largely ineffective against crowds of lighter units. And when dueling Berserkers, they pretty much turned me into Super Chop Suey in a matter of seconds. Taking on the Illuminate, using the Hatchet against the Voteless yielded the best results. Bullying a Crescent Overseer was also great, but taking on a staff-wielding specimen put me in the dirt. Admittedly, this one was very angry at something, so that probably had some effect on my performance. In summary, the Hatchet works very well against certain medium units across all fronts and is good for the Voteless. I certainly don't recommend it for bug swarms or patrols of marauding bots. And now we move on to the first of two melee weapons with stun, the CQC-19 Stun Lance, which is unlocked from the Urban Legends Premium War Bond. This electrifying number works much the same as the CQC-1 One True Flag, but obviously comes with stun and does less damage overall.
I'm pretty sure they use these things in some of the Ministry of Science's secret laboratories.
Interloper, we've been through this. No leaking sensitive intel during briefings. Moving swiftly on, when fighting the bugs, the Stun Lance does a decent job of keeping swarms of light and medium enemies at bay. While one bug is reeling from the attack, you can engage another, meaning that crowd control is much easier as a whole. Of course, the trade-off is that it takes longer to kill enemies, so you'll need to keep this in mind. I still prefer the One True Flag here, but the Stun Lance is a fairly close second. When facing bots, the Stun Lance is actually a great choice for taking out Berserkers. Crowd control against troopers isn't really a thing though, and I found the Stun Lance underwhelming against lighter units. I imagine it would fare pretty well against Devastators too, but admittedly didn't face any during testing. In my opinion, the Stun Lance works best on the Voteless and Standard and Crescent Overseers. You will need to hone your technique, but being able to stop an Overseer from attacking is a major plus. So of the melee weapons mentioned so far, I would strongly recommend the Stun Lance for Overseers and general crowd control. In short, the Stun Lance is okay against bugs, excellent against Berserkers, and quite formidable against squid units. It may have a slow attack speed, but it has plenty of reach and is very helpful when you're in a bind and need to get away from a horde of bad guys. Let's now turn our attention to what you might call the Stun Lance's little brother, the CQC-30 Stun Baton, which is available from the Superstore for 200 super credits. It has less reach than the Lance, but a higher attack speed. So how does it measure up? Diving against the bugs, it was very effective in dealing with not just one, but two nursing spewers. By smacking them against their tiny idiot heads, I was able to subdue and eliminate them in mere seconds. It was like ringing the Liberty Bell, just with less ringing and more guttural fungal wailing. In truth, I prefer the Stun Baton against bugs overall because, even though it has less reach, it's much easier to stack the stun effect, making crowd management much simpler. Then on bots, the Stun Baton is still effective against Berserkers, but not quite as effective as the Stun Lance. That said, I could take on multiple Berserkers at once with relative ease. I don't love it against lighter units, but it's okay. I can't really recommend it against bots though. But again, for small crowds of medium enemies, it was definitely an effective answer.
I actually like the Stun Baton. It may lack damage, but if one diver in a squad uses it, it could really help to clear areas much more rapidly.
Good point, Interloper. That's some real food for thought. And of course, with the squids, the Stun Baton is actually great against the Voteless, more so than the Stun Lance. I would even go as far as to say that it's probably the best possible melee weapon against these once democratic horrors. I sadly didn't get to try it out enough against Overseers, but I'd think the Stun Lance is generally a better answer against them given their powerful melee attacks. I think I'll let you decide that one for yourselves though. In truth, you shouldn't sleep on the Stun Baton. It's probably the most versatile melee weapon across all factions, and amazing against the voteless. It may not do much damage, but it still packs a punch and can render entire crowds of enemies dead with the right approach. And now for the first ever medium armor penetrating melee weapon, the CQC-42 Machete, which can be purchased from the Superstore for 200 super credits. While it deals a lot more damage per swing, the Machete's sluggish attack speed makes it clunky in most scenarios. Still, it can put more than a decent dent in certain enemies, so it's well worth the price of admission.
It goes really well with the Federation's blade heavy armor. Makes you feel like a real Sardaukar.
Not sure I know what you're referring to. In any case, given its design, the Machete is a poor choice against lighter bug enemies and is mostly useless for crowd control. It does a decent job against smaller groups of warriors, but it's probably best for stopping the charge of a Brood or Alpha Commander. It has more knockback than other melee weapons, but as a general-purpose CQC armament, it is very poor when pitted against the Terminids. Trying it against bots, the best results were with Scout Striders, Devastators, and then Berserkers, more or less in that order. In a crowd of bots firing non-stop lasers, don't even think about using the Machete. Though I haven't done it myself, I have seen other Helldivers using the Machete to good effect against tanks, so that's something to consider for sure. And then with the squids, fighting the voteless was something of a chore. It works alright, but feels clunky and is way less effective than the Saber and Stun Baton. And just forget about taking on Overseers. They're faster and stronger than you, so the Machete just makes no sense against them. I cannot see a practical use for the Machete against the Illuminate, but further field testing may alter my view. Admittedly, the Machete, although an amazing looking weapon, is my least favorite choice, except against the bots where I found it pretty satisfying. But for bugs and squids, you're better off using other options. And last, but certainly not least, we have probably the most elusive melee weapon of all, the noble Entrenchment Tool. You won't find this in your armory, nor will you find it in the acquisition center. The only time you will encounter the Entrenchment Tool is when you land on a planet and find it somewhere near a given point of interest. These democratic digging devices won't make themselves known, so you'll need to look carefully if you want to find one.
Oh man, I find these all the time on missions. But the minute I go looking for one, they're nowhere to be found.
Super Murphy's Law, Interloper. And let's face it, generally speaking, the Entrenchment Tool is best for exhuming buried samples or digging a trench if you want some light cover. Keep in mind that it takes up your support weapon slot, not your secondary. So if you were carrying another weapon, be sure to take it with you once you're done with the Entrenchment Tool. While not recommended as a weapon, it can be used as such if necessary. If you are forced to use it against the bugs, it works much the same as the Hatchet or Saber, one-shotting scavengers and even dishing out some decent damage against small groups of bugs. But if you end up surrounded, you may as well dig your own grave and climb straight into it. With bots, don't even try to take on Berserkers. It's game over if they reach you. However, if you can close the gap with Devastators, the Entrenchment Tool is a solid choice. For lone troopers or even small groups, the Entrenchment Tool is effective. But again, when you find yourself surrounded, you'll probably want to switch to a ranged weapon or call in a 500 kg as soon as possible. And finally, against the squids, the Entrenchment Tool does a good job against the voteless and can be used to bully Crescent Overseers. But against all other units, don't even think about it. The Entrenchment Tool is ultimately more practical than it is deadly, but if you have no other choice, or just like cosplaying as a World War I soldier, then the Entrenchment Tool makes for a fairly versatile, if very limited, melee weapon. Well, Helldivers, we sincerely hope you have a better understanding of the melee weapons in our arsenal, at least the ones that are currently there. Obviously, using a ballistic shield, jump pack, and other equipment changes the game, but this was intended for you to get a purer idea of how each melee weapon works against each faction. Yes, I am aware I used the war pack with the Entrenchment Tool, but I had my reasons. So which melee weapon is your favorite, and why? Let us know in the comments. If you haven't already, make sure you become a member of the channel today so you can access all the perks, take part in live streams, and enjoy all the goodness the SES has to offer. And if you enjoyed this briefing, check out our previous video on grenades. We think you'll find it democratically fun and highly informative. That's all we have for you today, Helldivers. Until next time, stay liberated and never ever surrender. For Super Earth and democracy.